Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Mastering Midlife, How to Thrive When the World Asks the Most of You. I'm your host, Mark Silverman. Today, I've asked a gentleman named Eli Nash. He's a co-founder and president of an e-commerce company called Jeg & Son. He also founded a communication company called Mic Drop, where he is helping people get their stories that will impact the world out into the world. And I saw a video of Eli a little while ago, and it moved me to tears. And I wanted him to, as a businessman, as a man in the community with an interesting story, I wanted to bring him onto the show to tell his story and see how that can benefit our listeners. Eli, thank you for bringing your story to our show.
Thank you for having me.
So tell me, we were talking before the show about the video and your original story from a couple of years ago, and you said that's changed. What's the story now?
Yeah, so in the story you watched, I was at the time working with an organization or doing volunteer work for an organization that was combating child sex abuse, specifically in the Orthodox Jewish communities. And my story then was mostly about abuse, but as I've grown, I've learned that my story is about more. And my story didn't start when I ended up in that guy's room abusing me. My story started in the search for that guy's room and what was I looking for. And what I've noticed today is that as a child, I felt very unsafe for a variety of reasons. I think some of it was, there were a lot of different elements in my home. I'm one of 9 children. There wasn't a lot of money. There was a lot of tension between my parents. There was tension in the streets. There was a lot of racial tension. I grew up in Crown Heights. I was born in 1985. In the early 90s were race riots. There was this feeling always of being unsafe. I was searching for some sort of safety. When I think back, the place where I felt the most safe was in my grandmother's home. And in a lot of ways, the story of my life has been the search to get back to my grandmother's home when I was 4, 5, 6 years old, just to be in that place where I wasn't judged. I didn't have to do anything. I wasn't competing with my other siblings. It was just me, completely safe. And part of that search for safety actually led me to the room of the person who abused me. And I would say that it wasn't only the search, but I kept going back because despite the fact that he was abusing me, I didn't understand the connotation, but it wasn't as if that was the full, let's say, 2 hours I spent with him. It would start with me being alone with him in the room and him showing me board games or computer games or baseball cards. I was very into sports. I sometimes joke that the worst thing he did to me was not the abuse, was that he taught me to be a Mets fan. Instead of a Yankees fan, I could have had a much more joyful childhood. The Yankees in the 90s, instead I got the Mets in the 90s. But
so let me set some context for this.
In any event,
besides the fact that we're Nationals fans here in the DC area, and you don't have much to root for down there in Florida. Let me set some context for what we're talking about with the video. I'm going to put the link in the show notes, but this was a riveting account of your sexual abuse as a child and the ramifications of that in your life. And the original reason we came together was to talk about how we keep secrets as adults. You're a successful businessman. You're an adult guy, and in a religious community. And you have we worry about reputation. We worry about looking weak. We look, in the video you talk about one of the things that you were most shamed about was that you were weak. And that's something that keeps those secrets locked down. So people can go and look at that video as just a part of the story you're sharing now. And I just wanted to give that context to people that's the germination of your growth into what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I believe that talk was given in 2014. So it's been a few years since then. And one of the biggest changes between when I said that speech and if you watch it, you'll see a lot of pain. There was a lot of raw emotion that came out when I was talking. And it was one of the first times I spoke about the abuse publicly. And I was still coming to terms with why this happened to me. This is the most common question I've heard anyone who's abused is, why did this happen to me? And where I'm sitting today, I know exactly why this happened to me. Because what has resulted from my abuse is me sharing my story. And as I've shared my story, I mean, we've made tremendous change in the community. in the Orthodox community where I'm from, and I've gotten so many messages from people saying, thank you so much for speaking out. You don't know how you've helped me. I received a phone call from someone 3 weeks ago. He said he's been trying to contact me for the last 3 or 4 years. I don't know why he had a hard time, but he actually showed me some Facebook messages, which I must have missed. In any case, what he was struggling with is that he's also in the Orthodox community. He saw my talk, and he said he was abused as a child, and he has a lot of shame over that. And today, although he wants to maintain an Orthodox lifestyle, he finds himself attracted to men, and he's regularly engaged in homosexual sex, and he doesn't know how to reconcile the two. And just the amount of pain that this person felt. And I said, I get you, brother. That's why I said, I get you. And I just asked him if it's too much for him. If he wants, I said, forget who you're doing it with. It's just too much. Is the sex too much? Is it bothering you? He said, I do it way too often. I said, just forget about who it is. There's no shame in who we're attracted to. We don't choose that. Why don't you join some meetings? And since then, I get a good message from him every few days saying, thank you so much for referring me to meetings. I've met other people who have the same thing as me. I say, I know exactly why I was abused. If it was just to help this person, great, but I got a couple hundred stories like that. So I encourage others who've gone through pain or difficult experiences to question and say, what if there was real meaning in my experience? What if it wasn't random that this happened to me? How would I be different? And for me, the real healing always comes when someone else is helped. We can't say I went through pain and I'm a better person. I don't think that's enough. I think we have to say someone else is better off because of my pain, and that's where kind of healing sets in, and that's my main mission and why I encourage people to share stories today.
And that's why you're on this podcast. I want to share edgy stories with people, have conversations that they wouldn't normally have. This started for me in the first podcast I was on with my friend Trip Lanier, who has the New Man podcast. And for me, that's kind of where men go to be men, even a little softer. And the conversation we had was about difficult conversations, and the difficult conversation Trip pulled out of me was my coming out to my kids, telling my kids that I'm gay and that I live with a man and that I love a man, and how terrifying that was, that I wanted to kill myself more than I wanted to talk to them, and the joy that turned out to be on the other side, and the wonderful family that I have now. I was mortified that I had this conversation and that it went out on the airwaves and it went viral. And I got calls from Singapore, from Europe, from all over. One man drove 10 hours just to come meet me to see that, he was high up in the military, and his father was the pastor of his church, and he just wanted to see that someone was real. And these people were on the edge. And I realized that my story, telling my story without shame, even with shame, was life-changing to anybody who was listening. So again, I resonate with you in so many ways. So I appreciate you bringing this to this conversation.
Yeah, I think the strongest pain is the isolation. I saw a quote by someone recently that a lot of prisoners, if given the choice between very extreme physical punishment or isolation, will take the physical punishment over over solitary confinement. And I think in my case, for sure, the abuse that I went through, I was isolated from everyone. I felt that I was different from every single person. Hanging out with friends, I was the odd guy out. And I had this feeling forever. When I started talking about my story, I realized, no, I'm not the odd guy out. Everyone's got struggle and pain. And one of the reasons why I pivoted from only talking about abuse to now encouraging other people to share their stories is because everyone has one form of pain or another that they can heal from. And it's not really about sexual abuse. That wasn't what my main message was, because a lot of people don't have that pain. They do have others. And it could really be anything. It could be the pain of losing a loved one. It could be the pain of a physical disability. Recently, a guy at the company I work with saw what we were doing with sharing stories. And he came out and said, hey, I was born blind in one eye. But that wasn't so bad. I always felt a little bit different. But 3 years ago, he's 25 years old. 3 years ago, I found out I'm going deaf. And it scares me to no end. First of all, it embarrasses me that I'm going deaf. Like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my body? But I don't know how bad this is going to get, and it scares me. And this Monday, he'll be sharing his story in front of a couple hundred people. We're putting him on stage. And I have no doubt that there are other people who feel the exact same way he does, completely shameful that their body is not working the way they want it to.
It could be, you're right. It could be, and it could be dyslexia. I know people who have put themselves through law school hiding the fact that they're dyslexic. How badass is that? That you could do something like that, right? That's something that they're embarrassed by. And to me, I'm like, how brilliant are you to be able to do something like that?
100%. Yeah. I think that's, it's a touchy topic. And when I brought up my, the guy who had called me, who I still don't know his name, about um, his sexual abuse when he was younger, and then now dealing with a lot of sex, just a strong desire for sex, including the desire for men, and how much shame that brings him. The the thought how it just kind of all connects. There's so many people. I mean, I brought up that story, and that's partially your story, and that helps him. And there's just this world of stories that can kind of, that when we share, we realize we're not that different. We're really not that different. And the more we can share, the more we know each other, the more we feel that feeling again of inclusiveness and connectedness, and takes us away from that pain of isolation.
This is a theme of a lot of my guests on this show. Uh, in we're focused on people in midlife, and I say midlife is the definition isn't really an age. It's when you start to see that what you were doing before doesn't work anymore. So again, the success that you're having no longer is fulfilling, or it's starting to take a toll, or the secrets that you've kept since childhood, the things that you don't tell people start to weigh on you. And you said earlier, before we started the call, that they either come out overtly or they come out sideways.
Oh yeah.
And the relief of communicating what's going on with you.
The that talk you mentioned was secrets, and how toxic secrets are. And there's so much, even in my own family, it took time for them to understand, why am I sharing my story? Why am I saying this? And at first, one of the most painful moments in my childhood was when my mom said to me, how come you can't, she obviously didn't know I was abused by this older boy. She said, why can't you be more like him? He's such a good kid. And the pain just felt like a stab. And I shared this. And the reason I shared this, the reason it was important for me to share, was, one, I wanted to kind of highlight what the pain, but the second was that my mom was totally confused by this guy, right? Abusers don't come in the form of creepy always, just the opposite. From all the people, she picked him out as the one to emulate, and said, why can't you be more like him? She didn't give me that analogy with 20 people, it was him. So I was making that point. And at first, that and the other stuff I was talking about gave my mother a lot of, gave my parents, not pain, but it was question, why are you doing this? Do you need to do this? And now there couldn't be more pride. Because I know people come to them also and say, thank you, I'm so grateful that your son is talking about those things. So I know often when people want to keep secrets, they say, the reason I'm keeping a secret, it's not because of me. I want to keep secrets to protect the people around me. And it's my story, and I get to tell my story, and I should do it and will do it with sensitivity to the other people in my life, specifically those closest to me. But I still need to share my story.
So you're also a businessman.
Mm-hmm.
So you have other things that you need to do besides share your story. How do you manage that? How do you go out in the world, be a strong businessman, do what you need to do, and juggle all of this, both the emotional juxtaposition of going back and forth, and also your time?
It's a good question. Recently I did a talk that was invest in yourself to help your business, right? That the focus should be, I started this whole journey of discovery because I could not stop lending people money and not putting boundaries around myself. That's where this whole journey started. I didn't get into self-discovery because I said, hey, this would be a cool book to read. I was reading business books. I was focused on how much money I could make. But I just had an inability to assert myself, an inability to say no, and I didn't feel deserving of the money I was making. And when I saw this pattern of, not that people were taking from me, but that I wanted to say no and I couldn't say no. That was a pattern I saw. I was like, I'm not stupid. I had wanted to tell the person no, so I know that my brain is working. It's just the connection between my brain and my mouth isn't. And I'm saying yes instead of no. And that's what the very first time I walked into a therapist's office. I want to be clear, I grew up in an environment where therapy was also something to be ashamed of. So it was a pretty big deal, right? I'm parking 3-4 blocks away from the therapist's office to go there and not telling anyone else. It's like, oh, walk up the steps so no one sees I press that button on the elevator, and it's a large building. And in terms of so when I walk into the therapist's office, I tell him this, and within 15 minutes he asks me, were you sexually abused? And that's what you're saying, right? Is that these things come out in one form or another. And the next 3 or 4 sessions with this therapist, I just had to know if this is a question he asks everyone. Like, is this like a box you check? And finally, after 3 or 4 sessions, I was like, but when's the last person you asked? And why did you ask them? And how often do you ask? And the reason it was so important for me to know was exactly what you were saying before. Is my past coming back in some way? Or is this just standard question he asks, and this thing about me lending money is a completely different different issue? And
you and I have way too many parallels, because I have forgiven so many. I have given out tens of thousands of dollars. My ex-wife is going to be hearing this. And, I have given out tens of thousands of dollars to people over the years, and never gotten a dollar, never gotten paid back. And I've had to forgive those debts. But yeah, every time you talk, I think, wow, there's another place where I didn't know how to set boundaries. And that goes all the way back to being a kid.
Right. And where did that start for me was setting boundaries around myself. Is yes, I want to see your baseball card collection. Yes, I'd love for you to teach me that computer game. No, I don't want you to use me to bring yourself to orgasm. Right. So it couldn't stop there. And it was the same thing. I have a friend, and yes, I want to be your friend. Yes, I want to hang out with you on the weekend. No, I don't want to give you a $10,000 loan that I don't think will get paid back.
And people don't make that. This is one of those highlighter moments. People don't make that correlation. Why am I acting a certain way now? I know better. I think better. My values don't match. And, going back into the past, though scary, often will unlock the reasons why we're doing things.
So it's kind of interesting, because initially the process was, let's say if I was on a scale, I'm at a -5, let's say, because of this experience with my abuse and everything else. And my goal was just to get me back to 0 and say, okay, let me just be back to normal, whatever that means. And whatever the impacts of the abuse were, I just want to rid myself of that. But now I've completely transformed it. And like I said, and I don't remember if we said this before we started the recording or after, but so I'll say it again, is if I was writing my book, I would put that story in there. Not only would I put that story in there, I'd put every single painful experience up to today in there. And when a new one comes around, my framework for is, how do I add this into my book now with a good ending? How do I turn this? How do I give this situation a lot of meaning?
So tell me, who are you today now? So with all these experiences and the things that you've turned around from a -5 to whatever number you're at now, who are you today?
Who am I today? Today, I'm someone who likes a couple of things. Like I said, my personal vision is to challenge the status quo in some way, and I know that's cliche, but it's really for us to question our maps and saying, okay, is this okay? Are we doing education the right way? Are we looking at business the right way? Are we looking at this the right way? Just let's keep questioning, and the questioning kind of has to never stop. So I've actually left the work I was doing with child sex abuse, because where I grew up from, that conversation has pretty much been settled. People know, by and large, obviously individual stories are always confusing, but by and large, the subject matter, people know we have to protect our kids from abuse, and if there's an abuser, they have to be locked up, or they have to be held accountable, whatever it is. And that's no longer challenging the status quo, so I move on to the next thing. And for now, a lot of it is saying, so many people are suppressing secrets. I sit with a group of my own employees, and one guy once asked me, he said, "Eli, what's your goal?" And I said, "My goal," I said, "You want to know my number one goal? My number one goal is to never watch porn." And this guy's face just melted. He didn't know what to do with it, because we're all protecting ourselves from everything else. And what's the big deal? Yes, I've watched a little bit too much porn in my life, and now I don't want to do that anymore. And we don't have to be ashamed, because someone's feeding the beast. Someone's feeding this $100 billion industry, and we know that, but we're all ashamed to admit it's us. There are tons of therapists, people are going, but we're all ashamed to admit it's us. And I've gotten more from sitting in a group of people saying this happened to me, and then saying it also happened, same here, versus sitting in a therapist's office. Not to knock therapy, but there's a power that every human being holds just to tell us in some way, you are not alone. I am not alone. So this is, you asked me who I am now, who I am asking these questions. And for now, I'm on this journey of let's get stories out there. Let's get people to share their stories.
Beautiful. So the question I'm leaning towards for the people who are listening is, if this is the hero's journey, and we go into the darkness and we go into the ashes and we come out the other side to bring back whatever gold we have from that journey to our community, what gold are you bringing back?
I think the main goal I'm bringing back is to resolve that question of why. I think it's the most painful question we ask ourselves is, why did this happen to me? Why was I chosen? Why, of all the kids on the block, did he choose me to abuse? Why was I born, in the family I was born? There were a lot of good elements, but there was also a lot of tough parts to it. And why did that happen to me? And 2 years ago, here in business, why did that happen to me? And these questions of why plague us in one form or another. And I'm committed to living my life that it's not random. And these things that happen to me are very specific. And in every single experience, there is a piece of gold that exists there. So you have, what's my gold? My gold is that there is a gold in your experience. I know it's painful. It's painful as hell. Some of these things, I can't tell you what it felt like to go through. I'll give you one example that's coming to me now. Is my wife and I are married about a year and a half. Our relationship started for about 6 years. At a point in time, any mention of any person that she was ever with or interested or kind of interested felt like a stab in the belly. It didn't matter what I did to her to get it to that point. It didn't matter if it happened before me. It's just this incredible pain I felt when she was with the fact that she may have been or could have been or was with another man. And that, I remember where I was as I'm sitting with you now. I was in Israel on an army base. I was visiting, and I wanted to spend some time there just to kind of see what it was like. I was sitting alone in the woods, and I said, like, what is this pain? And I kept asking myself, what is this pain? It felt like a knife in the belly. What is this pain? And I explored, and I found that I'm just not comfortable with myself, and I'm competing against everyone. And I'm upset that I'm not as rich as Warren Buffett, and I don't have the basketball skills of a Dwayne Wade, and I don't think stop to think that Warren Buffett can't play basketball that well, probably. I'm just competitive with everyone, and everyone is making me feel.
And you lose. You're competitive with everybody, and you lose on every shot.
That's what I feel, right? Because there's always someone richer, and there's always someone better, and I'm measuring against the best of everyone in the world. So when I hear that my wife at some point in time likes someone, I don't think that, hey, she's with me now and she loves me. I don't think that. I just think that I'm somehow deficient, and it creates this pain. And that exploration, I said, led to a place of, I'm going to somehow be comfortable with myself. No matter how much pain I have to walk through, no matter how many times I have to say, I'm not going to numb this out. I'm just going to sit here and feel the pain and ask, what is this all about? How can I explore this? And that's this message I love to share with other people, is that it's not random. What's great for me is that I grew up in a religious community. And I hear people talk about being religious, and I say, if you have a painful experience, if you have a resentment, if you have a major fear that you're not dealing with, you do not believe in God. You cannot tell me you believe in God if you have a resentment, because God either is or he isn't. And this is not, I'm not here to talk about anything spiritual. I'm saying, for someone who claims to be religious, how can they say that experience, how could I say that this experience that happened to me as an 8-year-old child, that God had nothing to do with? Of course he did. He chose me. He chose me for this mission to stand up and talk to other people, first about abuse for a few years, and now he chose me for a new mission, for people to share stories. And in a few years, I hope he chooses me for something else, because I get bored quickly.
I turned my own story around in kind of the same way. I was doing my own journaling on, why is it so hard for me to be an entrepreneur? Why was it so hard for me to, I was a very successful sales guy, but it was really hard for me. Why did my marriage break up? Why did all these things happen to me? And then I realized I was an ADD, alcoholic, drug addict, sexaholic kid, who was abused and really had no shot at life. There was no reason for me not to die in the street. Somehow I got sober. Somehow I got sober and went to college. Somehow I got sober, went to college, and started making money, fathering children, creating a really cool marriage that didn't last, but and creating 2 children. And then when tragedy hit again, I turned it around and turned it into I'm of service to humanity.
Right.
Right. And I'm sitting there thinking, wait a second, I'm not successful, and I'm not who I am despite all that stuff. I'm this way because of all these things.
Exactly.
And how badass am I that I'm still here and I deal with these things every day, and I still create and I still give. And so for people who are struggling, the couple things you said that I just want to underline is, we're as sick as our secrets.
Mm-hmm.
You've got to find someone to talk to about anything. 2, to go into that pain. If you have a knife sitting in your stomach and you don't know what that pain is, instead of anesthetizing it, instead of distracting yourself away from it, if you can sit and journal, talk to someone, explore it, find out what that boogeyman is, the gold is in there for you to have the opportunity and the power in your own life to transform that. And then the last piece for me that I got from you is that what happened to us, what we participated in, whatever our life story is the gold we have to share with everybody else. It's not the thing to be ashamed of. It can change everything for someone. Those are the 3 things I got from your story.
Yeah, I have a coach who says, make your mess your message. And that's very relevant. I do want to add one thing, just because I'm thinking as you're talking, if I was 10 years ago and I'm hearing your message, what would I think? And like, would it be enough to get me out from where I was? And I know that sometimes when I'm talking to people, it can come across as even more shame to heap on someone. You're not there. How come you're not there? How come you're still in addiction? How come you're still staying there? And someone told me this. In Hebrew, are you familiar with Hebrew at all? The way the language works?
Yes.
Yeah. So you don't have quite vowels, right? You don't have E's and A's. You'll have more of like the vowels under the letters to say, okay, this is how to pronounce this word and this is how to pronounce that word. So the Hebrew word for why is lama. Why? Why did this happen to me? But if you change instead of lama, you say lima, right? Same letters, but you just change it a little bit. It means for what? And if we ask the question that way, if you say, why did this happen to me? Like, why? Why was I abused as an 8-year-old? It sounds like it's this horrible question we ask ourselves. And we say, for what? For what did this happen to me? For what purpose did this happen to me? Same words, but we just change it just a little bit. We open up a whole can of exploration. I would say the same thing with almost every negative behavior. For what reason was I not asserting myself? For what reason was I going to addiction? For what reason did I have jealousy? And I had a very good reason to have jealousy. It was a very important behavior to keep me safe for a long time. Competitiveness and jealousy. Early on when I started my business, if I heard that a competitor was doing slightly better than me, I can live on that in the office for the next 3 weeks. So it got me to a certain point. I don't want to take that away from me. It's just no longer useful for me today. But it was very useful where that started. The same thing with not being assertive. It probably wouldn't have been a good idea for me to be assertive as a 12, 13, 14-year-old. I would have got bowled over, and it probably wouldn't have been a good idea as a 13, 14, 15-year-old not to watch porn. I don't know how I would have gotten through my teenage years without it. But now I don't need those same coping mechanisms. And this is a big part of my message, is that also is just the gentleness. Dr. Gabor Mate calls it compassionate inquiry, is to ask ourselves questions with no judgment and say, for what did this happen to me? For what did I develop this negative behavior? Why did I stay this longer? And why did I stay in this longer? And I do everything I could to, like I mentioned, to stay away from certain behaviors. I would like to think that if I went back there after I got through the shame and the initial feelings of pain from it, ask the same question: is why did I need this to happen? What did I need to learn again? For what? So it's just that really gentleness and that real compassionate inquiry, which is so different than we're taught, is we've got to be tough on them. If you don't tell them what to do, then they're not going to do it. You got to say, no, you got to work hard. It's just the opposite. It's just so much gentleness and so much compassion that you just start loving yourself and saying, I want the best for me. If I want the best for me, this is what I got to do. I got to live rich. I got to, be successful. I got to have a great group of friends. I got to have a healthy family. My wife's got to be thrilled. Everything's got to be going great because I deserve it.
Pema Chodron, a Buddhist nun and author, says that when things happen to us, we can either harden or we can soften.
I like
And
that.
listening to you to hear how you have softened and opened your heart from the traumas that you've had is an absolutely stunning, stunning thing to witness. So what's next for you? What's your big projects?
So the project that I started 6 months ago, it's called Mic Drop, and it's really helping people share their stories. We do both with individuals and within corporations, and we bring stories out within companies. I started in my own company, and we have about 100 or so employees here. We had people share stories and what it did for the culture and what it did for the individuals. It was just life-changing. We started bringing it out to other companies. We're working with the U.S. military. We've worked with other very large organizations. And we also bring it to individuals. Let's just get stories out there. I'll give you a great example. We were working with a financial firm, and someone's story, which had a lot of shame attached to it, but we have, a workbook that people work through. So what did it say there? What's the struggle? And he said, well, I grew up in a trailer park, and my dad went bankrupt. So the trainer asked him, our trainer's name is Rosh Lowe, he's a head trainer, a former news reporter, said, why don't you want to share, what's holding you back from sharing that story? You seem so tense when I ask you about it. Said, well, if my clients knew that my parents went bankrupt, they would never want to work with me. They're like, that's where I came from. He said, no, just the opposite. Sit there with your clients when you're working with them and say, I know the pain of going bankrupt. I saw it in my own life. I know what that feels like, and I'll never let something happen to your money. Use your story as strength for that interaction. That was a layup, but sometimes we don't see layups. We need someone else to see a layup. And that's what happened there. And I sure as hell hope that when he sits with clients today, he tells them that story. He tells them how his dad went bankrupt and it resulted in him living in a trailer through tremendous pain, and the poverty sucked. And he understands that now when a client is investing his money with him, that he has the responsibility to keep him as far away from where he was. And he's going to fight like hell for them to make sure that happens. And he'll close a lot of business if he does that.
You're 100% right. That's beautiful. So thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing your wisdom. To everybody else, thank you for spending time with us. This was if you're triggered, call someone, ask for help, because we uncovered a lot in this conversation. If you like the conversation, please share it on Facebook, Twitter, whatever your social media of choice is. Leave a comment. Let me know what subjects you'd like me to tackle in the future. I love you and thank you for being with us. Eli, have a great day and thank you so much for sharing your story.
Thanks so much. I really appreciate it.